Hey guys, tonight we step through a door you probably shouldn't. The wood is swollen with years of spilled ale and muddy boots. The hinges cry out like an old man getting out of bed. And the smell, oh, the smell is a dizzy cocktail of smoke, sweat, and something fried in questionable fat. You're here to see what really happened to women inside medieval taverns. Spoiler, you probably won't survive this if you eat the stew. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Post your location and your local time in the comments. I love seeing where and when you're listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The door closes behind you with a thump, and you're swallowed by a world where daylight is banished and shadows seem to stick to the walls. Candles sputter in iron brackets, casting a dim gold haze over everything. It's crowded, elbows, cloaks, tankards, and you immediately notice that women are not merely decoration here. They are woven into the fabric of this noisy little ecosystem, every bit as essential as the ale itself. Your boots scrape across a sticky rush-covered floor. The air is warm, thickened by the mingled scent of burning tallow, yeast, and wood smoke. Somewhere nearby, bread crusts and chicken bones crunch underfoot, probably from last night's feast. This isn't the polished old tavern you see in tourist brochures. This is the real deal, circa 14th century, when a public house was part bar, part boarding house, part gossip factory, and part low-key survival game. A woman in a faded green kirtle strides past you, carrying a tray stacked with wooden mugs. She has forearms like oaken beams from years of hefting ale casks, and she barks orders at two boys to fetch more kindling. No one argues. She's not just a serving wench. She's a general on her battlefield of tables. A drunken laugh explodes to your right, followed by the slam of a tankard on wood. You turn and catch a glimpse of another woman, older, hair coiled tight under a linen cap, calmly sliding the man's payment into a leather pouch tied at her waist. She's counting before he's even finished the story he's trying to tell her, eyes sharp, ears sharper. Historians still argue whether women in taverns held more social leverage than their homebound counterparts. But here, it feels obvious. She runs her own kingdom in this smoky hall. There's music, too, of a sort. Not the romantic lute strumming you imagine, but a fiddler sawing away at a tune that sounds half joyous, half like the violin is trying to escape. Two women clap in time, their skirts swaying dangerously close to a low-burning candle. Someone shouts for another round. You press deeper into the room, skirting a table where three laborers argue over whose turn it is to pay. One of them points at the youngest barmaid and tries to wink. She ignores him entirely, eyes on the spilled ale she's wiping away. You realize quickly that surviving as a woman in a medieval tavern means cultivating a gaze that can slice through unwanted attention without saying a word. A small fringe detail you might not expect. The tavern cat, a ginger thing with a crooked tail, slips between your legs and hops onto a bench beside a stout woman who smells of rosemary and ash. Without breaking her conversation, she tosses the cat a scrap of fish. Animals are part of this world, too, not just for company, but for pest control. Rats have never respected closing time. You find a narrow spot near the hearth where the fire roars in a stone-lined pit. It's the warmest, brightest part of the tavern, and also where the women seem to cluster when not serving. They're talking, laughing, sharing news. The conversation moves faster than you can follow, but certain phrases, tax levy, market stall burned, abbot's niece, stick out. This isn't idle chatter. It's the heartbeat of the community. A jug of ale is passed to you before you can refuse. It's cloudy, bitter, and has a faint tang of metal, likely from the brewing kettle. Fun fact, ale was often safer to drink than water in many medieval towns, because the boiling process killed some of the nastier microbes. Still, your modern stomach wonders if it should be filing a protest. Above the din, you hear the door creak open again. A pair of travelers step inside, shaking off their cloaks. Their entrance barely registers. This tavern sees faces come and go all night, but one of the women behind the counter watches them closely. Her eyes linger a moment too long on the pouch at the taller man's belt. You can almost feel the calculation. In this world, a new arrival could mean profit or trouble. Someone near the hearth bursts into a coughing fit, doubled over, and two women spring into action, one steadying him, the other fetching a cup of watered ale. There's no doctor here tonight, so whatever happens will be handled with whatever herbs, cloths, and prayers they can muster. Life inside these walls moves in quick bursts. One moment laughter, the next quiet urgency. The ceiling is low, blackened from decades of smoke, and every so often a gust of cold air sneaks in through a warped shutter. It carries the scent of damp earth, reminding you that outside, night has wrapped the town in a different kind of stillness. Inside, though, the rhythm never stops. Tankards clink, boots shuffle, spoons scrape. A young girl, too young to be serving ale legally, though medieval legality is a flexible thing, hurries past with a tray of trenchers. Her dress is patched in 3 places, but her braid is neat, and she walks with the kind of purpose that suggests this is not her first night dodging elbows and spilled broth. She disappears into the press of bodies. From your corner, you catch a fleeting smile between 2 women carrying jugs. It's a private joke, invisible to everyone else, but you can tell it's the kind that can get you through a long, noisy shift. The tavern may not be a glamorous place to work, but it is, in its own way, a network of survival. In the farthest, darkest corner, a table of men in travel-stained cloaks glance up every time the door opens. You notice one of the serving women make a slow loop past them, listening without seeming to listen. Maybe she's looking out for trouble. Maybe she's gathering information for someone. In a place where ale and gossip are both currency, it's hard to tell the difference. The fire pops loudly, a spark leaping toward the rushes before fizzling out. No one flinches. This is just part of the nightly soundtrack. You lean back against the rough wood of the wall, the vibrations of the crowd traveling through your spine, and think about how easy it is to lose track of time here. Hours melt into each other, measured only by the draining of mugs and the dimming of candles. And somewhere, beneath the music, laughter, and clatter, there's an unspoken truth. Every woman here has a story that doesn't end when the tavern closes. You'll hear some of them tonight. Others will remain hidden, tucked away like coins in a stitched hem. For now, though, you're just one more figure in the glow of the hearth, watching, listening, and letting the noise wrap around you like a threadbare but familiar cloak. The clatter of tankards blends with the scrape of stools on the uneven floor as you turn your attention to the women moving between tables, barmaids and alewives in their element. They weave through the crowd with the grace of seasoned sailors, each step avoiding spills, elbows, and the occasional grabby hand without so much as a pause. You can tell they've learned this dance over years, maybe decades. The first woman you notice wears a rough-spun wool dress, the sleeves rolled high despite the chill. Her apron is already blotched with dark ale stains, but she doesn't seem to mind. She's too busy balancing 3 foaming mugs on one arm and calling for another cask from the back. Alewives were the lifeblood of taverns in this period, often brewing their own stock at home before hauling it here to sell. In fact, for much of the medieval era, women dominated the brewing trade. Historians still argue whether their prominence came from necessity. Men often work in the fields or from the sheer practicality of running an alehouse from the family home. Either way, without them, half these patrons would be sipping tepid water and grumbling into their beards. A man shouts for more drink and slaps a coin onto the table. A barmaid with sharp cheekbones and an even sharper stare scoops it up before it can roll away. She leans close, not in flirtation, but to make sure he hears her. That's for the last one. Pay again if you want another. The way she says it leaves no room for argument. A flicker of amusement passes between the women nearby, the kind of solidarity that's invisible unless you know to look for it. Quirky detail for you. Alewives were sometimes accused of cheating customers by using a peck, a wooden measuring pot, with a false bottom to shortchange the drinker. Whether that was a genuine habit or just slander from their rivals is still up for debate. But here, tonight, every measure seems to brim to the edge, partly because these women know repeat customers are worth more than one clever swindle. Behind the main counter, a heavy slab of oak worn smooth by years of elbows and spilled drink, a stout woman with a wide smile is pulling fresh ale from a barrel taller than you. She chats with 2 younger women as she works, her hands never still. You hear her mention the morning's brew, thick with barley and spiced with a pinch of something she won't name. It's her secret, and she guards it like treasure. You suspect this flavor alone keeps a few regulars coming back. The counter itself is a stage. Coins clink down in small stacks, wiped mugs are lined in rows, and every so often a plate of bread, cheese, and onion appears without any visible signal. The barmaids seem to read each other's minds, anticipating when a table is ready for another round or when someone's had enough and needs a discreet nod toward the door. The alewives' work doesn't stop with pouring drinks. You watch one woman slip into the back room for a moment, returning with a fresh loaf and a small knife, which she uses to cut generous slices for a table of tradesmen. She sets the bread down alongside their mugs without a word, already moving toward the next group. The food keeps the ale from going to heads too quickly, or at least that's the hope. One woman, hair tucked neatly beneath a coif, pauses near your spot by the hearth. Her eyes flick over your clothes, your posture, maybe even your boots. She asks, "First time here?" When you nod, she smiles knowingly and says, "Mind your purse, and don't drink faster than you can think." It's good advice, and you suspect she's given it to more than a few green-faced visitors. You notice the way they all keep moving. There's no leaning against walls or idle chatter unless it's paired with some task. In the background, 2 girls refill jugs from the barrel while the older women work the room. Even the moments of rest are strategic. A sip of water here, a shared glance there, but never long enough to lose sight of their surroundings. All the wives, in many towns, had to deal with strict licensing laws, often enforced by male guild members who saw them as competition. That reality hovers here too. You catch snippets about the Reeves' visit last week, the taxes due before market day, and someone muttering about the brewer from St. Anne's trying to undercut their prices. This tavern might feel like a warm refuge, but it's also a small business under constant pressure. One woman catches your gaze as she hefts a cask from the floor to the counter. She grins, teeth white against the dim light, and says, "Better arms than half the soldiers in town, eh?" She's not wrong. The physical labor here is relentless. You can almost hear her muscles protesting as she sets the cask down with a thud. The pace never slows. A group of masons in dusty tunics arrives, greeted with shouts and mugs already half filled before they reach their table. One of the barmaids, barefoot because her shoes would only slow her down, wipes her brow with the back of her arm and winks at them as she delivers their drinks. They laugh, already sliding coins her way. She'll earn enough by the night's end to keep her family fed, though not much more. Somewhere in the background, a lad tries to impress a young barmaid by juggling 3 apples. It ends predictably, with one rolling into the rushes and the others bouncing off the counter. She laughs politely, retrieves the stray apple, and gets back to work. She's heard every trick, every clumsy line, and knows how to keep the night moving without inviting trouble. The barmaids pass between customers and counter with an uncanny awareness of space, dodging and dipping in a pattern you can't quite predict. You start to realize it's not just muscle memory, it's survival. A misplaced step could spill a drink, start a fight, or lose a coin, and no one here can afford that. You also notice how often the women trade glances across the room. Silent check-ins, quick warnings, or shared jokes. In a place this loud, words aren't always practical, but a raised eyebrow or a tilt of the chin can speak volumes. You see it when a loud patron leans too far into a barmaid's personal space, and another woman materializes at her side with a jug to accidentally interrupt the moment. Even the smallest motions carry purpose. The way one woman pours ale with her left hand so she can keep her right free to fend off a handsy drinker. The way another keeps her coin pouch tied beneath her apron instead of hanging at her belt. These are the skills of a seasoned tavern worker, passed down like family recipes. You lean back, watching the scene flow around you like a river, never still, always finding a way forward. And you begin to understand something important. The tavern isn't just a place where women serve ale. It's where they hold power in 100 subtle ways, from the tilt of a jug to the tilt of a conversation. By the time you notice your mug is empty, one of them is already there with a refill, setting it down without a word, moving on before you can thank her. The night is still young, and they have 100 more steps to take before the last candle burns low. The room hums with a rhythm you're beginning to understand. Not just music and chatter, but the quieter cadence of deals being struck. You edge toward the counter where the women work, and it becomes clear. The tavern is as much a marketplace of whispered bargains as it is a hall of ale and roasted meat. A woman with silver threads in her hair leans across the bar toward a man in a patched leather jerkin. Her voice is low, but you catch fragments. 3 hens, next market. No coin, just the salt. It's barter in its purest form. Eggs for salt, salt for meat, meat for cloth. In a world where currency isn't always the most reliable tender, women here have mastered the art of value swapping. The coins you do see are handled with care. One barmaid takes a silver penny from a cloaked stranger and tests it between her teeth. Not for show. Soft metals can be clipped or hollowed, and she's not about to be cheated. Historians still argue whether taverns were safer places for women to trade than open markets. But tonight, watching her fold the penny into her apron and nod curtly, you'd believe this place is her stronghold. You hear another negotiation unfold between two women themselves. One, clearly an alewife, offers a small sack of dried herbs to another in exchange for a promise. Delivery of the good honey by week's end. There's no parchment, no seal, just the unwavering certainty of reputation. In medieval communities, a woman's word could be as valuable as her goods, though breaking it could exile her from circles like this one faster than any official decree. Then comes the gossip, though here, gossip is currency too. A red-haired woman leans on the counter, recounting how the Reeves' wife was seen leaving the baker's shop with more than bread. Her audience chuckles, but you notice how quickly the information spreads, carried on the lips of serving women weaving through the crowd. By the time the story reaches the far corner, the baker has been replaced with the tanner, and the loaf of bread with a bolt of expensive cloth. Quirky little truth. Some of the news that ended up in official court records began as tavern whispers like these, embroidered into legend long before any scribe touched ink to parchment. A man with hands blackened from forge soot tries to haggle for his ale, offering to repair the tavern's iron hinges in exchange for a night's drink. The alewife behind the bar pretends to consider, but her eyes twinkle. She knows the hinges aren't in dire need of fixing. Still, she agrees, perhaps because it's easier to grant the favor than argue, or perhaps because she's already thinking of other repairs she can slip into the bargain. Not all exchanges are welcome. Near the hearth, a thin man sidles up to a serving woman and mutters something about settling that debt in kind. She freezes for half a heartbeat before setting her tray down and replying, loud enough for the nearest table to hear, "Your coin or your mouth shut." The surrounding laughter isn't cruel. It's a wall of support. The man retreats without another word. Every now and then, a deal shifts into more dangerous territory. You overhear one patron offering another a dagger for sale, the kind small enough to hide in a boot. The negotiation is swift. Price agreed, item passed under the table, and the woman carrying the drinks there doesn't flinch. Maybe she's seen it all before. Maybe she knows when not to involve herself. One transaction is as much performance as exchange. A peddler opens a worn satchel, producing lengths of ribbon in faded reds and blues. His audience tonight isn't the men, but the women of the tavern. They touch the fabric with cautious fingers, haggling over price and quality. One barmaid finally trades a pair of woolen mitts for a strip of crimson ribbon, tucking it into her sleeve like a secret. That ribbon might show up braided into her hair tomorrow, or it might be kept for months until a festival. Either way, it's a victory she earned in a place where most eyes aren't looking for women's wins. The barter extends to services, too. You watch an older woman, maybe the tavern's unofficial seamstress, mend a tear in a man's sleeve while he drinks. In exchange, he promises to deliver a basket of apples from his orchard next week. No coin changes hands. yet both leave the table satisfied. And there is an unspoken layer to these trades: trust. A regular can run up a tab without fear of being cut off immediately, but strangers have to prove themselves. You see one woman refuse a customer's request for credit, her tone polite but final. There's no apology. Trust is earned, not given freely. Of course, not every bargain is purely practical. In one corner, a young woman laughs with a carpenter, their heads close together. She's teasing him about the size of the table he promised to build her, and he's insisting he'll make it even larger if she agrees to test the ale with him next week. You can't tell if it's genuine courtship or just the tavern's playful version of it, but either way, it's wrapped in the language of trade. A quirky detail floats past your ears. Someone mentions paying the church tithe not in coin, but in beer. Apparently, the local friar doesn't mind visiting taverns for inspection purposes. Whether that's spiritual duty or personal indulgence is, as always, a matter for debate. As the night deepens, the deals keep happening. Some loud, some whispered, some tucked between the lines of casual talk. You start to realize that in this tavern, women aren't just serving drinks. They're orchestrating the economy, balancing debts, cultivating alliances, and doing it all in the middle of a crowd that barely notices the threads being pulled. By the time you finish your latest mug, you've witnessed half a dozen transactions that will ripple through the town in the days ahead. Some will be remembered. Others will dissolve into the warm haze of candlelight and ale, forgotten except by the women who made them happen. The music has shifted, slower now, a steady pulse beneath the chatter. It's the kind of tune that makes you sway without realizing it, even if you've been on your feet all day. You glance toward the open space near the hearth, where a handful of patrons have formed a loose half-circle. In the middle stand two women, one with a lute balanced on her hip, the other already stepping into a playful little jig. This is where the tavern's entertainment comes alive. The lute player strums with confident fingers, plucking out a melody that's part hymn, part mischief. The dancing woman wears a faded but brightly stitched bodice that catches the firelight, and her skirts flare just enough to reveal flashes of striped stockings. A little wink to the crowd. She grins as she moves, spinning on the balls of her feet, the hem of her skirt sweeping close to the boots of the nearest patrons. The songs here aren't the polite courtly ballads you'd hear in a noble's hall. They're bawdier, rougher around the edges, with verses that wink at lovers, poke fun at local officials, and slip in a few lines that would make the parish priest frown. Historians still argue whether women's participation in such performances was considered scandalous or simply part of tavern culture. Judging by the approving roars from the crowd tonight, no one here minds a little cheek with their ale. The lute player breaks into a new verse, her voice rich and warm. You catch lyrics about a miller's wife who measured more than grain, and a shoemaker whose last wasn't the only thing he wore down. The laughter that follows is immediate and loud enough to rattle the tin candlesticks. A man nearby slaps the table in delight, nearly toppling his mug. Entertainment isn't just about music, though. From the back corner, another woman, short, wiry, with eyes that sparkle even in shadow, launches into a story. She doesn't shout, but her voice cuts through the din with the kind of clarity that makes you lean in. She tells of a traveling knight who mistook a pig for a damsel in distress, and by the time she reaches the punchline, even the cook has left the hearth to listen, a quirky little detail. Tavern performers often improvise verses to include local gossip or poke fun at regular patrons. It's a dangerous game. Tease the wrong person and you risk a thrown tankard. But the reward is immediate goodwill and often free drinks. Tonight, one of the dancing women throws in a line about the blacksmith's missing hammer, and half the room bursts into knowing laughter. Not every performance is public. You catch sight of two women slipping into a quieter alcove with a small group of merchants, carrying nothing but their voices. Their laughter rises and falls in rhythm, punctuated by the occasional clink of coin on the table. Whatever story or song they're sharing is for those men alone, and the exclusivity seems part of the bargain. The lute player shifts into a slower, almost mournful tune, her fingers brushing the strings like she's coaxing a memory to life. The crowd softens, leaning in to hear a ballad about a sailor lost at sea. Even the drunk at the far end of the counter quiets, swaying in time. It's a reminder that taverns weren't always loud chaos. Sometimes they were places for shared moments, stories that carried a touch of home into the firelight. Then, just as easily, the mood swings again. A young woman bursts from behind the bar with a set of wooden spoons, tapping them against her palm. She joins the music, the quick percussion turning the ballad into something lively again. Another woman produces a small hand drum from under a bench, and suddenly the whole room is clapping along. It's impossible not to feel pulled into the rhythm. Historians note that in some towns, tavern entertainment by women was regulated, either banned outright or limited to certain festivals, under the suspicion that it encouraged improper behavior. But here, in the flickering firelight, no one is quoting statutes. They're too busy enjoying themselves, and the women performing seem entirely in control of their stage. A boy darts between the tables, collecting coins in a small wooden bowl for the performers. He hands them off to the lute player with a grin, and she tucks them into her bodice without missing a chord. Payment is often ad hoc, but the generosity of the crowd tonight suggests they know good entertainment when they hear it. Even the barmaids become part of the show. One balances a tray of foaming mugs while swaying to the beat, earning a cheer when she spins the whole way round without spilling a drop. Another joins in the chorus from across the room, her voice bright and untrained, but all the more charming for it. The stories, too, grow more animated as the night deepens. You hear a woman recounting how she once outdrank a man twice her size, slipping in the detail that she was watering her own ale. The punchline lands with a roar, and a new round of mugs appears as if on cue. Some of the performances double as subtle self-promotion. One singer mentions she'll be at the market tomorrow with fresh pies, and another drops hints about her work as a seamstress. The tavern is not just a stage, it's a marketplace for skills, charm, and reputation. By the time the lute's final chord rings out, the air is thick with heat, the tang of spilled ale, and the sharp scent of pine smoke. The dancers bow low, skirts sweeping the floor, and the crowd answers with stomps, claps, and a few coins tossed onto the hearthstone. The performers slip back into the flow of the room, some returning to their roles as servers, others vanishing into the crowd. The music lingers in your ears, and you realize it's part of what keeps people coming back. Not just the drink or the company, but the promise of being surprised, amused, maybe even moved before the night is through. In the far corner, where the firelight fades into shadow, you catch the muted clink of dice on wood. It's a different kind of music, soft, tense, and far more dangerous to wallets than to ears. A cluster of patrons leans in over a scarred table, and among them you notice two women with sleeves rolled up, faces calm, hands steady. Gambling in a medieval tavern isn't unusual. Dice, cards, even wagers on wrestling matches in the yard, but women at the table. That draws a few glances. Still, no one seems eager to challenge them. You sidle closer, careful not to draw attention. One of the women, her hair hidden under a dark wimple, tosses the dice with a flick that looks almost lazy. They land showing 2 sixes, and the groan from the man opposite her could rattle the rafters. She doesn't smile, doesn't gloat, just gathers the coins toward her side of the table with one hand while reaching for her drink with the other. Historians still argue whether women gambling in public was tolerated, frowned upon, or quietly ignored, depending on the town. Here, it's clearly not a novelty. You catch sight of a second table where a younger woman is dealing out a set of worn playing cards, her expression bright and unreadable. A quirky detail. In some regions, dice games were so common that authorities tried banning them altogether, ostensibly to prevent crime, but often because they feared taverns becoming hubs for idle vice. Of course, bans rarely stopped the games. They just made them quieter, shifting them to corners like this one. The game in front of you shifts quickly. The woman with the wimple leans forward, proposing a side wager on the next roll. Double if you win, but you buy my ale if you lose. The man hesitates, glances at the coins he's already lost, and then nods. She tosses. The dice tumble, spin, and land with another pair of high numbers. This time, she does smile, just barely, and lifts her mug in a silent toast before he trudges to the counter. At the card table, the dealer slides a hand of 5 to each player, her movement smooth as silk. A man tries to distract her with a compliment about her eyes, and without missing a beat, she replies, "They're watching your coins leave." The table bursts into laughter, and she uses the distraction to sweep the next pot into her pile. Some of the games here aren't about money at all. You hear a bet over who can drink a mug of ale the fastest without pausing, and another over whether the fiddler will hit the same wrong note twice in a row. The wagers are small, sometimes just a bite of bread or a promise to fetch the next drink, but the thrill is the same. One woman near the hearth is keeping a running tally on a scrap of parchment, marking wins and losses with quick strokes. She's not playing tonight. She's the unofficial bookmaker, holding bets for others and taking a tiny cut for her trouble. It's clever work, low risk, steady reward, and judging by her heavy pouch, she's doing well. You notice, too, that some games are less about winning and more about testing nerve. A tall man challenges a barmaid to knucklebones, a game played with small animal bones, tossing and catching them in increasingly tricky patterns. She agrees, but only after he promises that losing means cleaning up the ashes by the hearth. 10 rounds later, the man is on his knees with a broom, grinning sheepishly while she pockets a ribbon he'd wagered. The atmosphere at the gambling tables is different from the rest of the tavern, tighter, more concentrated. Drinks are sipped, not gulped. Laughter is sharper, more calculated, and yet the same undercurrent of camaraderie flows here. Even the losers shake hands, or at least nod, before stepping away. A small drama unfolds when a newcomer accuses one of the women of loaded dice. She doesn't flinch. Instead, she invites him to choose any die from the table and roll it himself. When his toss comes up short, the crowd lets out a low, satisfied murmur. The man mutters something about bad luck and stalks off, leaving his coins behind. One older woman, her back curved but her eyes bright, sits with a pile of pennies so neatly stacked it looks like a tiny fortress. She plays slowly, methodically, and wins more than she loses. When a younger barmaid passes by, the older woman slips her a single coin, saying something about seed money. It's not charity. It's an invitation to join the game later. Gambling here also feeds into the tavern's social web. A man who wins big might buy a round for the room, cementing his popularity. A woman who loses gracefully earns goodwill she can draw on later, whether for business or for navigating the crowd when the night turns rough. As the dice rattle on, you realize there's a rhythm to these games too, one that blends perfectly into the tavern's heartbeat. Win or lose, every throw and shuffle pulls the players deeper into the night, binding them together in the same way the music and ale do. By the time you step away, you've learned something. In this place, the women aren't just playing the games, they're shaping them, bending the odds in the subtle ways, and walking away with more than just the pot. And just like the dice, they never seem to stop moving. The farther you move from the gambling tables, the more the air changes. Less clatter, more rhythm. The faint, steady thump of a foot tapping under a table grows into a full-bodied pulse as you near the musician's corner. Here, the tavern's other great draw takes center stage. The music, the dancing, and the women who keep both alive long after the candles should have guttered out. The stage, if it can be called that, is nothing more than a low platform built from old planks, smoothed by years of boots and bare feet. At its center stands a fiddler with a bow that moves faster than your eyes can follow. To her left, a woman beats a frame drum with her hands, the sound carrying across the entire room like a heartbeat. And to her right, a singer with a voice both sharp and sweet enough to slice the air leans into the crowd, pulling them in with every verse. Dancing isn't limited to the stage. On the open floor, women in simple skirts spin and sway, their steps loose, unstudied. Some dance with each other, some with customers, and some alone, eyes closed, letting the rhythm pull them wherever it likes. One barmaid, her hair escaping its braid, balances a mug of ale on her head as she twirls, a show of skill so practiced that she doesn't spill a drop. The dances here are not the stiff, courtly kinds you might find in noble halls. They are quick, hot with energy, feet stomping hard enough to make the benches shake. Now and then, a patron joins in, usually after enough ale to forget their own clumsiness. Laughter follows every misstep, and more than one woman uses the chaos as an excuse to spin away from an overly eager partner. There's a tradition, it seems, of weaving wagers into the music. A fiddler might challenge a dancer to keep up with her fastest reel with a coin or a drink at stake. Tonight, a short-haired woman in a green sash takes the dare, her boots pounding the floor in a blur of motion. The crowd counts the beats aloud, and when she reaches the final note still on her feet, the room roars like she's won a tournament. Musical talent here is not just for entertainment, it's currency. A woman who can sing, play, or dance well enough can trade her performance for food, drink, or even a place to sleep. Some of the musicians are clearly travelers, their accents strange, their songs carrying the cadence of far-off coasts or mountain passes. Between sets, they slip into the crowd, sharing tales for a coin or learning the local gossip for free. One harpist, her instrument small enough to cradle in her lap, plays a tune so delicate it seems to hush the entire room. Even the gamblers in the corner pause their dice for a moment. When she finishes, she bows her head slightly, and the applause is warm but respectful, as if breaking it too soon would spoil the aftertaste of the music. A peculiar detail catches your eye. Several women have bells sewn into the hems of their skirts. When they move, the bells chime softly, adding an extra layer to the music. It's not just for sound, it's a signal. In the press of the crowd, a change in rhythm might be a way to call attention, warn a friend, or mark the moment when a certain customer should pay up. The musician's corner is also where you see the most deliberate mingling between social circles. A brewer's wife sits beside a traveling merchant's daughter, both clapping in time to the same tune. Even the kitchen staff peek out from the back when the rhythm turns too good to ignore. It's a space where the usual rules blur. If only for a song or two, you learn quickly that the music is as much about the people as the notes. The fiddler has a habit of locking eyes with a patron mid-song, daring them to dance. The drummer slips extra beats into her playing to trip up new dancers, then grins when they stumble. And the singer, her voice carrying across the rafters, knows exactly when to hold a note just long enough for the room to lean in before the final chord. Sometimes the songs carry stories. One ballad tonight tells of a miller's daughter who outwitted a corrupt tax collector by tricking him into dancing himself dizzy. Another song praises a mysterious lady in blue who could drink any man under the table and still sing in perfect tune. These tales blur fact and fiction, but in a tavern like this, the truth matters far less than the delivery. When the music slows, the dancers catch their breath and the floor becomes a maze of chatting clusters. But the musicians never truly stop. One plucks a quiet tune while sipping ale, another hums softly as she retunes her instrument. It's a constant undercurrent, the heartbeat of the tavern reminding you that the next burst of sound is only a moment away. By the time the candles burn low, the music has wound its way into you like smoke and cloth. You realize the tavern could lose its dice, its ale, even half its patrons. But without the music, it would be only a room. The women here aren't just performers. They're the pulse, the rhythm, the thing that turns a night into a memory. As the music fades and the crowd settles, the tavern reveals another layer. Its quieter, more intimate corners, where conversation is currency, and the women here trade in something far subtler than song or drink. These spaces are not hidden exactly, but they are easy to overlook if you only follow the noise. Along the far wall, past a half-drawn curtain, the light grows softer and the voices drop to a murmur. A small cluster of tables sits here, each lit by a single stub of candle, its wax pooling onto mismatched saucers. This is where the talkers hold court, the women who can read a man's mood faster than he can empty his cup. They work in pairs or alone, each with her own style. One leans forward as her listener speaks, her expression open, as though every word is the most important thing she's ever heard. Another sits back, eyes half-lidded, letting her silences pull more out of a man than any direct question. They are dressed less for spectacle than for comfort, though even here a flash of color or a well-placed ribbon reminds you that nothing in this tavern is accidental. The conversations range from the utterly mundane, crop prices, travel routes, family quarrels, to the dangerously pointed. You hear one woman coaxing details about a caravan's next departure, another steering talk toward the habits of a particular magistrate. The questions come wrapped in humor or sympathy, and more than once you notice that her partner is too busy enjoying himself to realize he's answering them. Some of these women are clearly here by choice, earning their living through wit rather than physical labor. Others seem to straddle roles, working the floor earlier in the night before slipping into these quieter exchanges when the hour grows late. A few wear the marks of travelers themselves: dusty boots, weathered hands, accents shaped by roads far from here. The clientele in this part of the room is different, too. Merchants who spent the evening at the gaming tables now lean in, their purses heavier or lighter, depending on their luck. Off-duty guards nurse the same tankard for an hour, watching and listening as much as speaking. Once, you glimpse what might be a minor nobleman, his cloak's fine clasp barely hidden beneath its folds, laughing quietly at something whispered in his ear. The drinks here are stronger and slower, amber spirits poured in small measures, wines that stain the lips deep red. They are meant to be sipped while talking, not gulped between shouts. A serving girl arrives with a tray and leaves without a word, her presence as unobtrusive as the candlelight. Every so often, a burst of laughter or the stomp of a dance step from the main room cuts through, and one of the talkers will glance toward the sound, smile, and return to her companion as though nothing had happened. They are masters of holding a man's focus, even in the face of louder temptations. It's here you realize that the tavern's economy is more than food, drink, and wagers. Information moves through these conversations like gold dust in river water, slow, subtle, but valuable to anyone who knows how to collect it. The women are the sift and the pan, catching what others let slip. Not all of it is gossip in the petty sense. Some talk concerns trade, what's moving cheaply in one port, what's scarce in another. Other exchanges touch on politics, though never openly. Names are hinted at, events are referred to sideways, and anyone listening without context might think it was all harmless speculation. But the glances between certain patrons tell a different story. There are also moments of genuine counsel. A young man, his hand shaking, admits he's thinking of leaving for the city. The woman beside him listens without interruption, then tells him where to find work that won't bleed him dry, and which streets to avoid after dark. Another comforts an older sailor worried about his daughter's marriage prospects, steering him toward a friend who knows a good match when she sees one. This is a different kind of performance, but no less skilled than the dancers or fiddlers. The stage is the table. The props are a half-empty glass and a leaning elbow, and the art lies in knowing when to speak and when to let silence work. You start to notice signals here, too. Fingers tapping twice on a mug to mean, "I'm done." A slow swirl of the drink to invite more talk. A glance toward the curtain as a subtle request for privacy. None of these gestures are written down, yet everyone who belongs to this corner seems to know them. By the time you leave this side of the room, you realize the tavern's walls hold not just music and laughter, but secrets. And while the songs in the main hall may be remembered for weeks, the words spoken here may shape decisions made months from now, in places far from this smoky air. Past the talking tables, deeper still into the tavern's winding layout, there is a narrow door, set into a wall of dark timber. It is unmarked, easy to miss unless you've been told to look for it, or unless you notice the way certain patrons seem to slip through without hesitation, always glancing back once before it shuts. The door opens onto a stairwell, steep and uneven, its boards worn smooth in the center by years of quiet traffic. The air grows cooler as you descend, the hum of the main floor muffling behind you. Down here, the smells shift. Less of smoke and ale, more of damp stone, old wood, and the faint tang of oil lamps. The basement room is low-ceilinged and sprawling, divided by thick beams that cast deep shadows. It is neither a cellar for storage nor a proper public room. It is something in between, a place that pretends to be private without ever being truly hidden. Here, the tables are fewer and the seating closer. Some corners are claimed by dice players whose games are slow, deliberate affairs, more about subtle wagers than noisy bets. Coins don't clink here. They are slid across the wood under a cupped palm. A few players keep small ledgers beside them, scratching notes in tiny script between turns. At another table, 3 men huddle over a map weighted with empty mugs. Their conversation is too low to catch, but you can tell from the way one taps the paper with a calloused finger that it concerns travel, or perhaps the movement of something more valuable than passengers. The lighting is strange here, a patchwork of lantern glow and shadow. Certain spots are lit enough for reading or counting coin, while others are deliberately dim, offering a veil for those who want to be seen without being seen clearly. It makes it easy to choose the kind of visibility you want. The clientele in this room are different still. There are fewer drunks, fewer obvious revelers. Many of the faces are older, marked by lines that come from more than just laughter. They watch each other with the wariness of people used to weighing risk before speaking. Some women from the upstairs floor work here too, though their manner shifts. Less open laughter, more measured interaction. They might sit beside a man and speak softly into his ear, or simply stand behind his chair scanning the room while he plays. They are not just companions here, they are part of the room's unspoken guard. Every so often, someone enters carrying a small wrapped parcel, which changes hands quickly and without comment. Sometimes it's a folded paper, sealed with wax. Other times, it's a pouch that makes a muffled, unmistakable clink. No one here asks what's inside. The drinks are different, too. The beer is barely touched, too filling for the kind of thinking done here. Instead, it's spirits in small glasses or even water, a rare choice upstairs, but common here for those who prefer to keep their heads clear. There is no music in this room, but sound travels strangely. A cough from one corner can be heard in another, yet 2 men speaking in the middle of the room might be inaudible from a few steps away. The beams and walls seem to bend the noise in odd ways, whether by accident or design. In one corner, a small locked cabinet stands against the wall. It's nothing ornate, just plain wood with a sturdy metal latch. But you notice that more than one person glances at it during the night. It is never opened while you watch, yet it's clearly not forgotten. There is also a second exit here, though it's easy to mistake for a storage door. Those who use it tend to slip through at odd intervals, returning with the faint smell of night air clinging to them. The tavern upstairs may be the heart of the building, but this space feels like its hidden pulse, slow and deliberate, pushing business of a quieter sort. If the upstairs is for stories that can be told aloud. This room is for the ones best left half-spoken or not spoken at all. By the time you climb back up the narrow stairs, the noise of the main hall feels louder than before, the light brighter, the colors richer. You realize you've been somewhere few of the evening's revelers even suspect exists, a place where the tavern's most valuable exchanges, coin, information, favors, happen in shadows and candlelight. To reach the courtyard, you must step through a side door near the back of the tavern, past the kitchen's open hearth. The heat of the fire gives way to the cool, damp breath of the night as you push the door outward. The space beyond is walled in by the same weathered stone as the tavern itself, high enough to block most of the wind, yet open to the stars. The stones are dark with moss where water seeps down after rain, and the air smells faintly of wet earth and ash from the kitchen's chimney overhead. By day, the courtyard might be a place for deliveries or for the staff to catch their breath, but at night it is transformed. A scattering of lanterns hangs from iron hooks along the wall, their light dim and warm, leaving wide patches of shadow between them. The ground is laid in uneven cobbles, damp in places, with weeds pushing through the cracks. Along the far wall, 2 long benches flank a low table, stained dark from years of weather. It's here that the smokers gather. Pipes, rolled tobacco, the occasional strange-smelling herb curling into the night. The smoke drifts lazily upward, illuminated in gold by the nearest lantern, before vanishing into the dark above. The courtyard's mood is slower, more contemplative than the tavern's interior. Here, people speak in quiet bursts, punctuated by the scrape of a match or the tap of ash against stone. The conversations are rarely about games or the bawdy stories told inside. Instead, they tend toward business that requires more privacy than the basement can give. Against one wall sits a row of barrels, some sealed, others half open. They are marked with faint chalk symbols, nothing a passerby would understand, but enough for those who know to tell what's inside without prying. From time to time, someone emerges from the kitchen carrying a small crate, placing it beside the barrels before disappearing again. The crates rarely stay there long. A narrow wooden stair climbs the wall to a small balcony above. From here, one can look down over the courtyard without stepping into it, a vantage point often occupied by those who prefer to watch unseen. Sometimes the door on that balcony swings open and a figure leans out briefly, scanning the gathering below before stepping back inside. The courtyard is also a meeting place for those coming and going from the side alley. A low wooden gate in the far corner opens onto a path between tall buildings, leading to the street beyond. The hinges are well oiled, and the latches quiet, so that comings and goings here are hardly noticed unless you are looking for them. At times, the sound of distant street activity drifts in, the clop of hooves, the faint call of a night vendor, the ringing of a bell somewhere far away. But mostly, the courtyard feels insulated. It's quiet, an intentional choice. One figure sits alone at the far end, a hood drawn up, a single candle burning beside them. Their hands move constantly, working at some small, intricate task. A knife handle being carved, perhaps, or a letter folded with unusual precision. No one disturbs them. In the shadows near the gate, a pair of men converse in low voices. You catch only fragments, numbers, dates, the name of a street you don't recognize. When they finish, one slips away into the alley, the other heading back into the tavern without a glance at anyone else. The courtyard seems to serve a dual purpose, a place for a moment's peace and breath away from the press of the main rooms, and a crossroads for business that flows into and out of the tavern quietly, unseen by most patrons. From here, you can look up and see the upper windows of the tavern, some glowing with lamplight, others dark. Behind each lit window is another piece of the building's life, rooms for rent, private gatherings, spaces where other kinds of deals are struck, but those are yet to be reached. For now, the courtyard feels like an open secret, not hidden, but not spoken of either. And when you return inside, carrying the scent of night air and smoke on your clothes, it's easy to slip back into the crowd without anyone knowing where you've been. Past the courtyard and up a narrow spiraling staircase lies the first of the upper floors. The stair itself is old oak, smoothed by centuries of use. Its banister is worn in places to a silvery sheen where countless hands have slid along it. Each step creaks faintly, never loudly enough to betray someone's approach from the other end, but just enough to remind you of its age. The first floor above the tavern is a mix of private dining rooms and rentable meeting chambers. The hallway here is carpeted in a faded red runner, its edges fraying, and the air is thick with the scent of candle wax and strong tea. The walls are paneled in dark wood, though watermarks near the ceiling show where the roof once leaked before repairs were made. On the left, a series of small rooms opened from the corridor. These are the close parlors, private spaces where guests pay for solitude. Inside, each parlor is lit by a single oil lamp on the table and a fireplace in the corner, though some fires have long since burned to embers. The furniture is mismatched. High-backed chairs paired with low tables, a chaise lounge next to a writing desk. It's clear that each piece has a story, acquired over decades from estate sales, departing merchants, or more dubious sources. The doors to these parlors have brass nameplates with faded engravings. The Sable Room, the Lantern Room, the Harrow Room. These names are known only to the regular clientele. Newcomers would see nothing more than locked doors with odd little scratches around the keyholes. At the far end of the hall is a larger space known as the Map Room. Here, a great circular table dominates the floor, its surface painted with an old map of the surrounding provinces. The edges of the table are gouged and scratched, with wax drippings hardened into ridges, signs that the map has been pored over under tense circumstances. Around it hang framed charts, trade routes, river systems, the mountain passes. A narrow cabinet in the corner holds rolled parchments bound with twine, each tagged with a wax seal in a different color. The map room is not open to just anyone. It is reserved for those who have business worth charting. Rumors say that here deals have been struck that redirected entire caravans, rerouted ships to new harbors, and even decided the fate of certain villages caught between rival factions. From time to time, muffled voices filter from behind closed doors along the corridor, negotiations, confessions, or perhaps something less lawful. A soft knock might be answered by a slit opening in the door, revealing only a pair of eyes before the latch is lifted. A secondary staircase at the far end leads to the second upper floor, this one narrower, as if designed for servants. The steps are bare wood, and they turn sharply, allowing you to rise unseen if you know which door to take. This floor is quieter, dimmer, and smells faintly of cedar and dust. Here lie the guest chambers. Some are small and plainly furnished, barely more than a bed, washstand, and trunk, but others are expansive suites with sitting areas, rugs, and small balconies overlooking the street or courtyard. A handful of these balconies have rope ladders or thick, knotted cords tucked discreetly against the wall, exits for those who may need to leave quickly without descending to the tavern. The ceilings here are lower, the beams exposed and darkened with age. In the hush of this floor, even a cough seems loud. The occasional sound of boots on the floorboards above suggests there is yet another level, an attic or loft space not mentioned on the public ledger. At the farthest end of the hall is a locked iron door. No keyhole is visible from this side, and its hinges are reinforced. The iron is pitted with age, yet the lock mechanism looks new. People pass it without pause, but every so often someone will linger, touch the door as if counting rivets, and move on. What lies beyond is unknown to most, perhaps even to some of the staff. Windows on this floor are shuttered from the inside. When opened, they offer a view of the narrow lanes that coil between nearby buildings. At night, the streets are dotted with lantern light, but from this height, the people moving below look like little more than shadows drifting between pools of gold. It's here that the tavern's heartbeat feels slower, as though the world beyond its walls has thinned. The noise of the common room and basement are muffled to a distant hum, replaced by the quiet shift of wood and the occasional sigh of wind through the shutters. Yet, for all its stillness, this upper floor carries a sense of watchfulness, as though the walls themselves are keeping track of who comes and goes, and why. Above the guest chambers lies the attic, though few outside the staff have seen it. Access is by a steep, narrow stair, hidden behind a panel in the farthest guest suite, a suite reserved for trusted associates, so the entrance is seldom discovered by chance. The stairs are enclosed and claustrophobic, with dust motes swirling in the dim light from a single slit window. The attic is not a single open space, but a maze of low-beamed rooms and crawl spaces, the result of centuries of uneven additions to the tavern structure. The air is warm and dry, scented with old timber, burlap, and the faint tang of oil from the lanterns kept up here. Most of the floor is covered with crates, barrels, and bundles wrapped in canvas. Some are labeled in neat script, barley, dried fish, lamp oil, but others bear no markings at all, their contents a mystery. The careful observer will note the dust is disturbed on certain crates far more often than others, and the padlocks on some appear new, their brass still gleaming. Near the center of the attic, beneath the tallest portion of the roof, is a space known among the staff as the nest. It is little more than a rough table surrounded by mismatched stools, but the table is littered with playing cards, dice, and a ledger full of coded notes. A tattered rug muffles sound here, and a narrow stovepipe leads to a vent in the roof, keeping the air tolerable even in winter. From the nest, one can move into a series of low crawl spaces accessible only on hands and knees. These spaces run along the rafters above the guest rooms and private parlors, allowing someone to eavesdrop through cleverly disguised vents or knotholes. The floorboards up here are uneven and occasionally treacherous, but well-worn paths show where listeners have crept for years. At the far end of the attic is a small, locked door, so low that most must stoop to enter. This leads to the lookout loft, a space tucked beneath the peaked roof with shuttered windows on 3 sides. These shutters can be swung open to give a view of the surrounding streets, the river bend, and the distant hills. A spyglass rests on the sill, and a small desk holds a sheaf of notes detailing comings and goings, names, times, descriptions. The attic is also where some of the tavern's most sensitive items are hidden. Beneath a trapdoor in one of the crawl spaces is a chest bound in iron. Its lock is peculiar, requiring 2 keys turned in opposite directions simultaneously. The chest is rumored to hold ledgers, contracts, and other documents that would be dangerous in the wrong hands. Whether that rumor is true or a deliberate fiction is anyone's guess. In storms, the attic takes on a life of its own. Rain drums on the roof, the beams groan, and the wind whistles through gaps in the shutters. In those moments, the space feels like the prow of a ship cutting through a dark sea. The regulars who work up here say that's when the attic is at its most honest, when its secrets feel closest to spilling into the open. No matter the time of day, the attic maintains an air of quiet purpose. Unlike the bustling common room or the convivial parlors, this space is meant for watching, storing, and listening. It is the tavern's eyes and ears, and in some ways, its memory. For those who know how to navigate it, the attic offers more than storage. It offers vantage points, hidden pathways, and perhaps even escape routes for those who find themselves in sudden need of one. And for those who do not belong, it offers a labyrinth from which they may never quite find their way back down. Beyond the attic's twisting passages lies a concealed stair spiraling downward into the tavern's oldest heart, the cellars. These were dug long before the current building took shape, their stone walls blackened by centuries of smoke and damp. The main cellar is a broad, low chamber supported by thick oak beams, their surfaces polished by generations of brushing shoulders. Here, casks of ale, barrels of wine, and clay amphorae of mead are stacked in orderly rows. The air is cool, heavy with a mingled sense of malt, yeast, and damp stone. Lanterns hang from hooks driven into the beams, their glow barely touching the furthest corners. The floor slopes gently toward a grated drain set in the center, a necessity when casks leak or when the cellars must be sluiced clean. Rats are rare here, not because of luck, but because of the tavern's 2 enormous mousers, gray-furred and half-wild, who patrol the shadows. In one corner, a thick wooden door banded with iron leads to the cold vault. This chamber is partly sunk below the water table, and its floor is often slick with condensation. Blocks of ice, harvested from the river in deep winter and packed in sawdust, line the walls in massive bins. Here, the most perishable goods are kept. Joints of venison wrapped in cloth, wheels of cheese aging to sharp perfection, and crates of delicate fruits brought in by river traders. The temperature is sharp enough to make one's breath visible. Another passage from the main cellar leads to the wine grotto. Unlike the utilitarian storage elsewhere, this small arched room is lined with racks built to cradle bottles. The air is warmer, scented with cork and fermented grape. Some bottles are coated in dust so thick they look carved from stone. Others gleam with new wax seals. The selection here is curated carefully, and the ledger tracking these bottles is kept locked upstairs. Only a few know the code to match the ledger's symbols with the bottle's true vintages and origins. But the oldest and most mysterious part of the cellars lies deeper still. Past a narrow doorway and down 3 worn stone steps lies the underhall. This chamber's walls are of rough-hewn blocks, its ceiling vaulted just enough to stand upright. The floor is earthen, stamped hard from centuries of feet. Here, long before the tavern existed, the space was used for storage by a merchant guild, or so the story goes. Faint carvings remain on the stone, guild marks, crude maps, and tally marks whose meaning has been lost. In one wall is a bricked-up archway, its keystone carved with a symbol few can interpret. Some claim it once led to a smuggler's tunnel that ran all the way to the riverbank. Others say it concealed something better left sealed. The underhall has another peculiarity, a shallow alcove near the far end, its base set with a round stone slab. The slab bears a groove along its edge as if it were meant to be pried up, but no one has ever done so successfully. Old hands at the tavern say it's because the slab doesn't open downward, but upward from the other side. Not all the cellars are silent. At certain hours, late at night, or in the lull just before dawn, a faint dripping can be heard behind the walls, though no source has been found. Sometimes, on winter mornings, the air in the underhall is warm enough to mist one's breath. Despite the frost above ground, the cellars are not merely for storage. They are the tavern's lungs, breathing in supplies and breathing out the sustenance of its trade. They also form a buffer between the everyday bustle above and the deeper, quieter currents of the tavern's history. Currents that have not stopped flowing, even if few dare to trace them to their source. For those who linger in the cellars too long, time has a way of slipping. You might emerge thinking only minutes have passed, only to find the candles upstairs burned halfway down. Beneath the cellars, accessible only through a narrow hatch in the underhall's farthest corner, lies a place spoken of in whispers, the deep vaults. Few have seen them in their entirety, for their layout is less a set of chambers and more a tangle of intersecting corridors, some natural, some carved, and others that appear to have been adapted from structures far older than the tavern itself. The air here is heavy, damp, mineral, and tinged with something metallic. Light carries poorly, swallowed by the darkness, so explorers carry 2 or 3 lanterns each, their glow barely touching the walls beyond arm's reach. The stone is different here than in the cellars above. Pale limestone streaked with veins of rust-red iron, slick in places with seeping moisture. The first section, known as the ledger hall, is a long rectangular chamber with niches cut into both walls. In each niche rests a clay tablet, a carved stone, or a fragment of something that might once have been a record. Many bear symbols no one can read, though some have been defaced or broken, as if someone tried to erase their meaning long ago. The floor is uneven, with depressions that collect shallow pools of water, reflecting the lantern light in restless ripples. Beyond the ledger hall lies a fork. One path slopes gently down into the echo gallery, a curving tunnel where sound behaves strangely. Footsteps come back muffled, but a whisper will sometimes carry farther than a shout, bouncing from wall to wall until it sounds as though a voice is speaking right beside you. The ceiling here is streaked with black soot, though there is no sign of any fire, only the faint scent of old smoke that never quite fades. The other path from the fork leads to the iron door. This massive, riveted barrier stands alone in a short passage, its hinges fused with rust. The door has no visible lock, only a small keyhole surrounded by an engraved circle of sigils. Those who have tried to open it find it unmoving, though on certain nights, when the tavern above is empty and the wind howls outside, a dull, rhythmic thudding can be felt through the metal, as if something on the other side is knocking patiently. Beyond the door, according to the most persistent rumors, lies the chamber below the water. Some claim it's flooded, others that it holds a cistern feeding an ancient aqueduct, and still others that it contains nothing but a pit of black, unmoving water. Whatever the truth, none who work at the tavern claim to have seen it with their own eyes. But perhaps the strangest feature of the deep vaults is a small circular chamber, found by taking a lesser-used side passage off the echo gallery. Known as the Watcher's Room, it contains a single object, a stone column rising from the floor to the ceiling, perfectly smooth and pale as bone. Carved into its surface are hundreds of tiny faces, each no bigger than a thumbnail, each wearing an expression that seems different depending on the angle you view it from. Smiling, frowning, weeping, or staring with eyes wide in silent alarm. Those who stand in the Watcher's Room for too long sometimes report the sensation that one particular face among the hundreds is watching them intently, and that if they turned their head quickly enough, they might see its expression change. The deep vaults are rarely visited, and even more rarely discussed. The tavern's oldest patrons know they exist, but prefer to treat them as a story best told over a drink by the fire. The younger staff are warned simply, "Don't open the hatch unless you're ready to come back the same way." Yet the hatch's key still hangs in the tavern's lockbox, its brass bow worn smooth from handling, proof that someone from time to time still goes down. At the very top of the tavern, above even the cramped attic rooms used for storage, is a space not marked on any of the building's plans. It is accessible only by a steep, narrow stair, hidden behind a hinged shelving unit in the attic, its wood so old and dry that it creaks in protest with every step. Few who work in the tavern even know of this stairwell, and those who do rarely speak of it. The stair ends at a low arched doorway with no latch on the outside. Inside is the lantern room. Despite its name, there are no lanterns here, at least none that burn with any visible flame. Instead, the chamber is dimly lit by a cold bluish glow that seeps from cracks in the floorboards, as though some strange light were trapped beneath the planks and struggling to escape. The room is circular, its curved walls lined with tall, narrow windows that look out onto nothing but darkness. Even during the day, no sunlight enters, and no scenery can be seen. Only shifting, formless shadows beyond the glass, as though the room were suspended in an endless void. At the center of the floor sits a single, iron-bound chest. It is always locked, though the lock itself appears simple, a standard keyhole with no visible traps or enchantments. The real peculiarity lies in the chest's weight. Attempts to move it reveal that it is impossibly heavy, as though it were bolted to the earth itself. Sometimes, when the wind outside is especially fierce, the windows in the lantern room begin to hum with a low, resonant tone. The pitch varies, and some claim the sequence of notes forms a kind of melody, haunting, yet oddly familiar, as if it's a tune one might have heard long ago in a dream. In one corner of the room is a tall, dust-covered mirror framed in tarnished silver. It reflects the room faithfully enough, but when viewed from certain angles, the reflection shows subtle differences. The chest may be slightly ajar, the cracks in the floor may glow brighter, or, most unsettling of all, a dark figure may be standing near the doorway, motionless and faceless, its head tilted as though listening. The tavern's owners have never acknowledged the lantern room, and when asked directly, they only shrug or change the subject. Yet the shelves concealing the stair are kept well oiled, the hinges free of dust, and a faint trail of footprints, bare, human, sometimes appears on the attic's dusty floor, leading toward that hidden doorway. Some nights, when the tavern below is quiet and the streets outside have emptied of their noisy drunks, a sound rises from deep beneath the floorboards. Not the creak of settling wood, but something that pulses like a slow heartbeat. You notice it first when you're lingering near the back wall, the one lined with empty ale barrels and bundles of herbs hung to dry. The thud is faint, muffled, but steady enough that your own breathing begins to match its rhythm without you meaning to. Old Nan, the woman who has cleaned the tavern for longer than anyone can remember, claims that the building wasn't raised on solid earth. Beneath it lies the forgotten cellar of a structure that came before, something older than the tavern itself, dug deep enough that the air down there has never been stirred by a living breath in centuries. According to her, the tavern's original owners walled it off after too many wrong sounds came from below. The trap door to this lower cellar isn't in the obvious places like the kitchen or the storeroom. Instead, it's hidden beneath a table in the back corner, a table so ordinary and worn that no one pays it any mind. The boards beneath it have been sanded and stained to match the rest of the floor. But if you run your hand along the edge, you can just feel the faint groove of a recessed ring handle. On the rare nights it's opened, usually by the current barkeep, when he needs to fetch casks from the upper cellar, it releases a breath of air so cold and stale that your teeth ache. The ladder down is rough-hewn and damp, and halfway down, the dim light from above fades entirely. At the bottom, your feet land not on wood or stone, but on something that feels yielding. The ground here is packed earth, but warmer than it should be, as though something beneath is radiating heat. That heartbeat sound is louder now, though still muffled, and if you stand still long enough, you can feel a faint vibration through your boots. Against the far wall are 3 sealed barrels, their lids hammered in with a care that suggests fear, not preservation. One has a jagged crack along its side, and a slow trickle of dark liquid seeps into the soil. It smells faintly metallic, almost like rust, but sharper. So sharp it seems to bite at your nostrils. There's also a door, not a sturdy wooden one, but a narrow iron gate that's been chained shut from this side. Through its bars, the darkness beyond is absolute. Yet if you press your ear against the cold metal, you'll hear more than the heartbeat. You'll hear whispering, too many voices to count, overlapping in strange rhythms, none speaking a tongue you understand. And yet, now and then, a word surfaces in the common tongue, a name, a warning, or worse, the sound of your own name, drawn out slowly like a sigh. Historians still argue whether this part of the cellar predates the town itself, with some insisting it belonged to an older settlement erased from maps long before the tavern's founding. Others think it's just a miner's tunnel gone wrong, though no mining records match its location. Still, you can't shake the thought. If the ground itself is breathing, maybe you're not standing above empty earth at all. The oldest patrons, the ones who drink in silence and keep their backs to the wall, know better than to linger in the cellar after the lantern is out. They tell, only after enough ale loosens their tongues, that the breathing ground isn't the strangest thing down there. If you stay in the lower cellar long enough for your eyes to adjust, you'll notice shapes that weren't there when you first came down. They're not shadows exactly, more like folds in the air itself, as if the space is bending around something that you can't quite see. They slide across the walls and floor without sound, without a source, like stains that can't decide where to settle. The iron gate, too, doesn't always remain silent. On nights when the heartbeat is strongest, the chains rattle as though something on the other side is testing their strength. Not with violent jerks, but slow, deliberate tugs, as though whatever waits beyond has all the time in the world. No one seems to know who first chained it shut. Some say it was done by the tavern's founder, who brought the chains back from a pilgrimage to a monastery on the northern coast. Others whisper that the chains themselves are older than the gate, scavenged from the wreck of a ship that sank before the harbor was even built. What's undeniable is that the air changes when you stand too close to it. Your breath fogs instantly, as though you've stepped into a deep winter, and the skin along your arms tightens with goose flesh. It's a kind of cold that doesn't fade when you step back. It clings to you, sinks deep into your bones. Some visitors claim to have looked between the bars and seen lights, small, pale ones, drifting lazily in the dark like fireflies underwater. Others swear they've seen faces, though not human ones, pressing forward just far enough to be glimpsed before melting away again. Every few years, someone disappears from the tavern. It's never dramatic, just a patron who goes down for a cask or a laborer sent to fetch more wood, and then nothing. No signs of struggle, no broken boards, no open gate. Only the faint smell of rust in the air and a set of footprints in the dirt, leading toward the iron bars, and stopping short, as if the person had simply stepped forward and ceased to exist. For all the unease it causes, the lower cellar has never been filled in or sealed. When asked why, the barkeep always shrugs and says, "It's older than me, older than this place. Some doors aren't meant to be walled shut. They're meant to be watched. It's not clear whether that's a warning or an invitation." You'd think that with all the strange noises, vanishing patrons, and general risk of being swallowed by a heartbeat in the floor, women in these medieval taverns would have avoided going down there entirely. But the truth is, some didn't just visit. They practically lived in the cellars, not because it was cozy. No, these women were cellar workers, and their job was to keep the barrels topped, the wineskins sealed, and the rodents from chewing through the corks. It was work that was equal parts monotonous and dangerous, and it meant dealing with the damp chill that clung to every joint in your body. You carry a small oil lamp as you descend the narrow steps, the flickering flame reflecting off metal hoops around the barrels. Down here, the air smells like a mixture of stale ale and wet stone. Somewhere in the far shadows, you hear a drip, steady and patient, as if the cellar has a clock of its own. There's a fringe tidbit here. In some taverns, women in the cellar were unofficial taste testers. If a new barrel was tapped, they'd pour the first cup and sip, not out of luxury, but to check for spoilage. Problem is, a spoiled batch often carried more than a bad taste. it could carry diseases like ergot poisoning from contaminated rye, leading to hallucinations, muscle spasms, and in extreme cases, death. A terrible way to find out that just a little taste can turn your hands into claws for a week. Historians still argue whether women were deliberately assigned the cellar work because they were considered less likely to steal large amounts of drink, or simply because their labor was cheaper and less visible. After all, upstairs, women might attract customers. Downstairs, they could toil unseen. Some cellars even doubled as makeshift quarters. If you were a poor serving girl without family in town, you might spread a blanket between the casks and sleep in the cool dark. Privacy, yes, but also the distinct chance of waking up to find a rat sniffing your ear. And if you woke in the deep hours, you might also hear what the regulars called the wrong sounds. Not footsteps, those you could explain. Not barrels creaking, wood does that. But faint humming, like a lullaby sung too slowly, too far away. Women who stayed here long enough started to hum it back, absent-mindedly as they worked. No one knew the words, but everyone knew the melody. Whether the humming came from something living beyond the iron gate or from the cellar's own memory, well, that's a matter for the next time you come down here, alone, in the dark, with your lamp. If you ever got tired of the cellar's chill and shadow, you might think the back rooms of the tavern would be a step up, warmer, brighter, maybe even safer. But as you push open the warped oak door into one of these tucked-away spaces, you learn quickly that safer is not the right word. The air here is dense, thick with the aroma of boiled meats, old tallow, and the faint, unmistakable tang of spilled ale seeping into the floorboards. A narrow table stretches along one wall, the sort where gambling games and whispered negotiations unfold. And at the far end sits a trio of women, their heads bent close together, speaking just softly enough to make you lean in. This was the unofficial domain of the Whisper Networks. Groups of tavern women who shared news, rumors, and sometimes warnings about dangerous patrons or crooked owners. The mainstream fact: taverns, especially in bustling trade towns, were crucial points for the spread of information. Merchants, travelers, and soldiers all carried stories, and women working here had an ear for the pieces worth remembering. The quirky tidbit: in some cases, women used coded embroidery as a form of clandestine communication. If a scarf hung behind the bar had a red stitch pattern, it could mean, "Watch out for the tall man in the blue cloak." If it had 3 gold thread knots, it could mean, "Tonight there's extra coin to be made." On the surface, it was just decoration. To those in the know, it was a bulletin board you couldn't erase. Historians still argue whether these whispered alliances were spontaneous survival tactics or deliberate, organized networks that connected taverns across regions. If they were organized, that would mean some women in these smoky back rooms might have known more about trade disputes, troop movements, or political scandals than the local magistrate. You sit on the edge of a bench and let the conversation wash over you. The women talk in loops, starting with something mundane like the price of onions, then sliding into whether the man in the corner with the ring on his left thumb is really who he claims to be. They trade glances, nods, and small smirks, never fully spelling anything out for you. And the thing is, they're not just passing the time. Every snippet of overheard talk, every fragment of rumor, is a potential tool, something to trade for favors, protection, or a few extra coins in the palm. You can almost see the network weaving itself, thread by invisible thread, right here in this dim, close-smelling room. But then you notice something else. On the wall behind them, there's an old scrap of parchment with faded ink. At first, you think it's just a receipt or a list, but the lines form strange shapes, curves looping in on themselves like vines. You feel a sudden, irrational certainty that if you stared long enough, you'd understand what it meant. The women notice you looking. Their smiles freeze just slightly, and you realize there are some stories in these back rooms you're not meant to take home. You step out of the back room with the parchment still flickering in your thoughts, only to find yourself drawn toward another part of the tavern most customers never see. The loft above the main hall. It's reached by a narrow, creaking staircase tucked behind a curtain, and the wood is worn smooth in the middle from decades of cautious feet. The loft isn't for storage. It's a watch point. From here, you can peer through the thin gaps in the railing and see the whole tavern below. The dice games, the arguments, the furtive handshakes. In many medieval taverns, lofts served as a kind of informal security station, and more often than not, women worked it. Sometimes it was the owner's wife. Other times it was a senior serving girl trusted to keep an eye out for pickpockets, debt skippers, or fights about to turn bloody. The curious bit here is that watch duty often came with its own set of codes. If a fight looked like it might escalate, the woman might drop a spoon from the loft. That was the signal for the barkeep to quietly fetch the cudgel. If she spotted a suspicious stranger, she might hum a tune that signaled one of the staff to approach them and start a distracting conversation. There's another detail the records hint at but never quite confirm. Some loft watchers kept ledgers, not tavern accounts, but lists of names. Patrons who owed money, who cheated at cards, who were seen speaking with the wrong people. In towns without formal law enforcement, that ledger could be more powerful than any court writ. You find yourself imagining one of these women sitting here on a winter night, wrapped in a thin wool shawl, scribbling notes by lamplight while the chaos of the tavern churns below. Every so often she pauses, eyes narrowing at a movement near the door, then quietly dips her quill again. There's a superstitious side to this, too. Loft watchers sometimes kept charms on the railing, a bit of ribbon, a carved wooden figure, to guard the tavern from misfortune. Some claimed you could tell the mood of the place by the way the ribbon swayed, even when the air was still. From up here, you start to notice how much more is visible when you're out of sight yourself. You can see the subtle exchanges of coins under the table, the way one man's eyes dart to the door every few seconds, and the fleeting glances that pass between people who pretend not to know each other. It's tempting to linger, to let the warmth of the loft and the slow rhythm of observation lull you into believing you're safe. But then you remember something. In every story you've heard about the loft, there's always one warning. The watcher isn't always the highest observer in the room. Somewhere above the rafters, where the shadows are thickest, you might not be the only one watching.